Hello and welcome everyone. Here's Charles-Emmanuel Côté, kinesiologist at the Cardiac Rehab Center here at Richardson Hospital, here to lecture you today about training according to seasons. All right, this is the title of our educative capsule for today. So we'll be discussing about how to adapt a bit your training and what to look for when you exercise in more extreme temperature, because we have the luck in Quebec to have four very different seasons. So you might have to experience exercising in a bit hotter other weather in summer and colder weather in the winter. All right, so we'll discuss a bit what are the risks of each one and how you can adapt and find solution for your exercise, because if you're in Quebec, you're gonna have to go through the season, unfortunately. All right, so let's start with the heart of the summer and the heat. All right, so with high temperature, the big risk with high temperature is eventually becoming dehydrated. So what you see here are the three different level of progression of dehydration. So the first sign of your body missing some water usually starts with a drier mouth, a thirst and not a thirst sensation, a bit more concentrated urine, so that means a darker color and a bit more smell from it. You could start to feel fatigue and get some muscle cramps. All right, so that's kind of your body's reaction when it starts to miss water, which could happen when you sweat a bit more and you lose more water when you exercise outside. So if you ever start to feel those symptoms, you should try to rehydrate yourself. And if you don't listen to those symptoms, they might aggravate into the next level, which are heat exhaustion and eventually a heat stroke. So if you don't listen to those symptoms and they keep aggravating, and the heat exhaustion symptoms build up to fatigue, heavy sweating, you start to get some dizziness and even some nausea in certain cases. You can have a headache that starts to build up. And usually your heart will react. If you feel at your heart rate, you should feel somewhat of a weak but rapid heart rate and low BP. All right, so if you start to feel those feelings, you should avoid continuing your exercise. Get back into a cooler temperature and rehydrate yourself, because your body's starting to decompensate on the dehydration factors. All right. And if you still don't listen to this and you keep staying in the heat and you keep dehydrating, well, you might get up to a heat stroke where your body is not able to sustain its own body temperature. So we get a very high increased body temperature. We start to see some alteration in sweating. You actually start to sweat less because your body doesn't have any more water to spare for sweating. The skin then usually reacts by becoming redder, more of a red tint, and hotter too. So, now after that, your heart rate usually starts to go faster too, and the breathing also, there's a bit of shortness of breath settling in. And it can even lead to an altered mental state where you start to be somewhat of a brain fog kind of thing, confused state, and etc. That's really kind of even your brain starting to miss on water too. All right, so if you ever detect any sign of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, you should avoid exercise, rehydrate yourself properly, and maybe wait for the next day before you go out and exercise again. But there is a way to minimize, let's say, the risk of dehydration when you exercise in the summer. Let's see what solution we have here. So of course, to fight off dehydration, hydration is the solution. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. So especially in the summer, you should make sure that you hydrate yourself and you drink some water before exercise, during exercise if you work out for 30 minutes or more, and after exercise to compensate for what you've lost during the exercise. So you should not wait until you are thirsty to drink, because if you wait, the feeling of thirst usually comes in when you already started dehydrating. You see, the thirst sensation is in the dehydration symptoms. So usually we say that once you start feeling thirst, you might have already lost about 10% of your performance because of dehydration. So as a general rule, keep drinking, small sips here and there, but don't wait for thirst. The thirst is not a good sign of being well hydrated or not. Of course, if we try to avoid high temperature, well, trying to stay cool or in the shade while you do your exercise could help you fight off that high temperature feeling. And picking a bit more your schedule during the day to go train earlier in the morning or more during the evening, where the temperature is a bit more mild and less hot. And of course, if you do go out a bit more in the sun, protect yourself with appropriate clothing. So wear a cap or something on your head to protect the top of your head. And appropriate clothing mean usually light and pale colors. All right, so let's get away from any dark colors and anything that's too thick also. And finally, just as a regular and general recommendation, don't forget the sunscreen and try to put it on maybe 10 to 15 minutes before doing your exercises. Sometimes our skin seems to have a harder time to excrete the sweat when you're still kind of absorbing the sunscreen. All right. So that's for the end of the hot end of the spectrum. Let's go see what's happening on the cold side of things when we're faced with exercising during the winter. All right, we can't get away from winter when you're in Quebec, so we have to learn and adapt to it. So the risk related with exercising in cold temperature, well, of course, since the surface of the ground is usually a bit more icy or snowy, well, it's a bit more slippery. So the risk of falls and of muscular injury is a bit higher. And just the fact that you're in cold temperature, your muscles are usually a bit more stiff and a bit more prone to muscular injuries. So we're going to see that warming up is going to be even more important in the cold. So our muscles are hot and ready to exercise when we are. There are also some risk of dehydration during the winter exercise too. All right, so staying aware of the signs of dehydration is also important during the winter. And yes, so same signs as last time. Another thing to watch out for is, of course, frostbite. So if you start to get insensitive in the skin, getting some tingling feeling or losing sensibility, you should look out for it and try to get those hands or those fingers hot again or whatever is frostbiting. So usually it begins either in the toes or the fingers. And if you don't listen to it, well, you can keep some insensitivity in there because it can become even red and cause some blister if you really get a real frostbite. And also, since our vessels are usually a bit more vasoconstricted when in cold weather, it is recognized that usually angina symptoms can be precipitated or happen at lower intensity than usual when you're exercising in cold temperature. All right, so your body vessels have a harder time a bit to dilate. So once again, we'll put a lot of emphasis on the warm up when we fall into the solution. Same thing for people with respiratory problems or asthma. Usually the whole respiratory system is a bit more sensitive to or reactive, let's say, to cold temperature. So you might have a harder time if you already have a hard time breathing in general. If you're outside in the cold, it's usually get a bit harder too. So those are the issues with cold temperature. Let's see how we solve these things and adapt our exercise to cold temperature. So once again, there is a better timing usually, and during the winter, it's when there is some sun out there. So training during the day is going to allow for a bit of a warmer weather, or let's say less cold than warmer. And also just for visibility. So exercise, since it's a bit more slippery, making sure you go out during the day and you see well what's happening on the ground and on the floor. That's an important thing to prevent falls also. Another good thing to prevent fall is using appropriate shoes where you go outside. So of course, if you got a nice sturdy winter boot or some cleats to put on your shoes to make sure that you're stable and you're not prone to falling or slipping on more icy surfaces. As we spoke earlier, our body needs to warm up to get into exercise mode, to get some warmth going on. And of course, during the winter outside in the cold, it's a bit harder to get that warmth going on. So feel free to extend the warm up. We usually say around 5 minutes. You should maybe build it up to about 10 minutes and really wait for that warmth feeling to be on before you really push it into your moderate intensity. So longer warm up during the winter, and that's also how we prevent muscular injuries, by making sure our muscles are ready to exercise. Drinking regularly, since there's still risk of dehydration. Whatever type of exercise, you should drink a bit more before, during, and after your exercise session. Of course, outside, the dressing warm is important, but the most important is usually dressing in layers. All right, especially when we go out to do exercise. Once we get our exercise going, we start to feel a bit more warm, to sweat a little. If your clothing starts to be too hot, you're going to sweat more, and then that sweat can kind of get pretty cold and icy once the cold gets into it. So having multiple layers, and some layers that you can take off during your hottest moment of your training and maybe put something back on if after you've cooled down afterwards, is a good practice, rather than having just one heavy layer that you can't really play with it afterwards. Of course, to prevent some frostbite or any discomfort in the extremities, covering them is usually important. So when we talk about extremity, we usually think about head. So we had covering in the sun, but covering it during cold weather is also important too. Covering nose and mouth can help also. And otherwise, it's mostly ears, hands, and feet. Make sure you got something appropriate to cover them and keep them warm. And for everybody to kind of get a better breathing feeling when you're working outside, because it can feel a bit more rough on your lungs when you're breathing cold air, is usually good practice to have somewhat of a layer that cover your mouth. So whether it be a scarf, uh, anything that can cover your mouth and create somewhat of a little hot hair pocket in front of your mouth. So the hair you can breathe in is a bit warmer, and it's less reactive for your respiratory tract. All right, so those are the different solutions that we can have to exercise during the winter. So now that we know a bit all of this, we could say that there's not really bad weather for exercise, but there's not adapting enough our practice to more extreme temperatures. All right, so the general rule of the thumb is mainly to listen to your body. Yes, it's gonna feel harder to exercise in hot or cold weather, and that's normal. So it's okay if you adapt the intensity to it. And remember that this good old scale of perceived exertion is a relative scale to the actual context of your exercise that day. So if it's very hot outside and you're going, well, you might not need to walk as fast as usual to get the same type of moderate feeling. Maybe usually you're walking at 3 miles an hour to get that moderate level going. Maybe by hot weather, you'll be good enough with 2 miles an hour. As long as you get that same type of feeling and you feel still in control, you're good to go. But you might have to lower the absolute intensity when you go out in extreme temperatures. It's already good that you're maintaining your temperature, your activity while there's a more extreme temperature. So feel free to lay off a bit the intensity, or at least to keep it at a moderate feeling. If it gets to a more vigorous feeling, you simply slow the cadence down a little. So that's what I wanted to see with you guys on how to adapt our exercise to the different seasons that we have here in Quebec. I hope that you've learned something new. If you had any question, feel free to ask them through, you can send them either through email, you got our email address down there, or you can also simply ask us in person when you see us in the program. We'll be more than happy to answer your question. You can get a little kind of memory aid or a cheat sheet for this capsule with a brief summary of everything we spoke about You can access this on our website. And I think that's pretty much it for today. So I'm gonna wish you guys a very good week, and I hope to see you soon. Take care and enjoy your exercise outside, guys. Bye bye.